What happens when two seasoned business leaders get together? They talk shop, of course. Sit back and listen in as Scott DeLong and Vince Moiso share from their experience around current issues facing executives, entrepreneurs, and their leadership teams. The CEO Podcast starts now.
Hey everybody, Scott DeLong with the CEO Podcast. I'm here with my partner Vince Moiso, as always, and we're into another episode. So this is going to be a pretty interesting episode. You and I were talking about it. I'm working with Vince and his company right now, and we're actually reading a book called The Fearless Organization from Amy Edmondson.
Yep.
And it sparked an idea for us to have on this podcast.
Yeah.
But so we're going to get to that in just a minute. But until then, we're going to be looking for a little bit of your support from the audience here. So
yeah, well, I mean, wherever you're listening, whatever channel you're on, whether that's Spotify or Apple Podcast, YouTube. Amazon, if you're watching us on YouTube, please give us your reviews. We want your comments. We want to hear from you, whatever you feel about the podcast. And you can always reach out to us at scottandvince@gmail.com. We're always looking for feedback on the next episode, the topics that are super relevant directly to you. So we've had, over the past 3-4 seasons is it's been great to hear from listeners and get very, very specific, not just feedback, but like, hey, this is what we want to hear you talk about.
The next topic, yeah.
Yeah, the next topic. And so we've had many of those. And thank you to everybody that has done that. We appreciate you listening. All right, let's jump in.
So I've been hearing more and more of my clients, customers, that are starting to do more book study kind of things. In fact, I've got an EO group in San Antonio I'm going to be doing a retreat for in a couple of weeks. And they're doing a book study on a 100-year-old book, Think and Grow Rich. And they did that on their own. I didn't ask them to. It didn't any of that.
Napoleon
they decided
Hill.
to do that.
Love it.
And they are just excited about this opportunity, sharing ideas. So we did that with your tile company, and with senior executives, and we picked a book called The Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson. And it is about the term psychological safety. It's been a term that's been thrown around quite a bit. And really, it only means a few things. It means that people feel safe to be able to speak their mind, whatever that might be. And so what do you mean by that? Well, without fear of retribution, it's not going to cost them their job. You're not going to laugh at them. You're not going to whatever. And it's really got to be a top-down driven initiative. The bosses have to believe in it, and they have to create that environment within the organization. However, anybody in the organization can screw it up. In fact, I just saw that happen with a company, a group that I work with. I'm on the board of directors of this group, and they were talking about a concept. And it was a socially conscious topic, and it was great. The conversation was going really well. But there was one gentleman in the group, worked for the company, who said, "I'm just not comfortable doing it myself. I'm fine if it's optional, but to mandate we do this." And the CEO was great about it. And she said, "Well, tell me more about that. Help me understand," right? Yeah. So they went through that, and she goes, "Yeah, you're right. Maybe it should be optional." And then somebody from the peanut gallery, and this happened to be someone that was on the Zoom portion. It was an in-person room, but there were 4 or 5 people out on Zoom as well, chastised this guy and told him why he's wrong. It's like, do you think he's going to speak up again?
No.
He's just going to silently go. It's a quiet quitting is what's going to end up happening, right? Yeah. He's going to silently not say anything and then not do what the initiative was all about. Anyway, so psychological safety can be ruined from any level. This one happened to be on a Zoom call from someone in this group that we're in.
Sounds like a peer too.
A peer, yeah. It was horrible. It was,
and that
I
can
was
even
cringing.
That can even be more damaging than coming from the boss, right?
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of ways we can take this conversation. But I do think safety and conversation within an organization is critically important. That's why we're reading this book.
Yeah.
It's why we're doing the work with you, because we're committed to being that type of leadership. And creating that culture within our business. And it takes a lot of work, by the way. It doesn't happen overnight. You don't just read a book and then things change. I mean, it's a cultural shift. The only point that I want to make with the example that you gave, and I think it's a great example, is just how important conversation can be. When you're in an organization, a business environment, there's a lot of people that are involved, and everybody's going to have a different personality.
They think differently.
They're going to have different beliefs.
Yeah.
They're going to have different things. And so I think you have to be open to what people have to say. And the idea, the concept of psychological safety is to allow people to freely speak without judgment.
And you're going to get smarter because of it, right? You're going to get another point of view, one that you might not have considered. It might not be one that you're going to believe in and live with and all that. That's okay. But that sparks this thing. And I know our producer, John, says, oh, you overuse the word synergy. That's an old word, but that's the word I'm talking about. It's like you bring up something and it's what EO forums are all about. It's creating that synergy, right? The different conversation between this group and that group and these people and coming up with something that none of us would have come up with by ourselves had I not listened to hear what you were thinking.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what psychological safety is about, allowing people to speak freely, to act freely, to be who they are, and that we're present to them. Doesn't mean we have to always agree with them, but to challenge someone or make them feel bad about their beliefs,
well, the author
in a minute.
The author describes it as candor, even extreme candor, with empathy.
Yeah,
and that's a critical component, because I have to tell you. So I'm big on DISC. I've said this before on previous podcasts. I'm at high DI, right? So I'm in that dominant space, and I'm just a very direct, results-oriented individual, and I've been that way most, if not my whole life, right? It's just, I speak my mind. I'm going to come out. I'm going to control a conversation, sometimes dominate it. And I've always done so without empathy.
Yeah.
And I've tried to change that. That's something like in the last...
Honestly, I've seen it change.
In the last 6-7 years especially, I've really worked very, very hard on starting to shift that, improve my listening of others. That being said, I was reminded from this book, and that hit me the most, is when she said, it's candor with empathy.
With empathy.
And I like that, because I really appreciate others that are direct, because I am so direct. And I appreciate that directness back. And admittedly, I haven't done so in the past with empathy. And I really love that she says that, because I think if we approach a meeting where I can be direct with somebody else, exactly how you said that CEO reacted is how a leader should react.
Tell me more.
Tell me more.
Yeah.
Help me understand what you're saying there. And then to come to the conclusion to say, you know what, maybe we should make that optional. That's amazing. Like, that's an amazing result from allowing somebody to speak, opening that up where you can be direct about the topic, and then at the same time have empathy to the other person and say, you know what, you're right, let's make that optional. That's huge.
And it's probably optional for now, right? Because change just doesn't happen when you demand change.
No.
We need to invite people in. So I was talking to I went to lunch with another board member from the same organization the other day, and I relayed the story, and she was like, whoa, right? And I said, you're not going to change the position of people by poking them in the chest and calling them an asshole.
No way.
It doesn't work.
No.
So what do you do if you poked me in the chest and called me an asshole? What would I do? Would I cower and say, "Oh gosh, you're right"? No, I would go just the opposite, and I would turn it into a fight.
Defense mode, right? So you're like, okay, here we go.
So what that did by making it optional and hearing him out is allow for the opportunity to later influence the way he thinks, not tell him how he thinks is wrong. Anyway, that was a great example. And
hold on, that's straight out of Dale Carnegie, right? How to Win Friends and Influence People. Sorry,
so another 100-year-old book.
Read the book. Read the book. It's not. Yeah. It's not that hard. I mean, you're just all you're going to do in that scenario is cause somebody to put their defenses up
and to stop showing up.
Well, and it no longer becomes a constructive conversation. Now let's talk about what can happen when you allow people to be totally creative and you allow people to freely speak up, and when they're not afraid. And that's the that's the key word here is fear. when they're not afraid and you can have open conversations, it's amazing what comes from that, right? You allow people to create, and it creates this just amazing culture within a business, because you're getting, look, we can't, as a CEO, president, or leader of the business, if you're in an executive leadership role, if you're unilaterally making decisions, if you're siloed in your decision making, you're probably not making all the right decisions. When you can allow people to not fear speaking up, you're going to be absolutely amazed at the ideas that then come your way that can radically change your business for the better. And in the book, by the way, the author gives what I do like about her style of writing is there's a lot of case study.
Yeah.
And I like the case study because what is it? It's experience share.
That's right.
Right. And so that really resonates with me as an EOer. I really like that because I can just listen to what that case study is. I can listen and see the results of when it's not psychologically safe and when it is.
And it's really easy to see. So I'm going to go back a little bit about something that you said, is that if you are the top-down driven leader, you've probably earned your position. You're probably the smartest guy in the room, right? Let's go with that, right?
Smartest person in the room. Yeah.
Smartest person in the room these days, absolutely. But you're probably the smartest person in the room. I'm going to give you that. However, I'm going to make this line that I've been using a lot lately, and you've heard it before on the podcast. We are smarter than me.
Yeah.
And if we're not creating that sense of psychological safety, I'm not going to find out what you have to say. How you can potentially improve my ideas, change my mind.
Totally agree.
Get us to think of something that is better than what I could have on my own.
Yeah.
Like we do this often. You and I were just talking before, and we were talking about some things in your company and things, and you had some ideas and directions you wanted to go, and I had some directions that I think you maybe might want to take a look at, and somewhere in there created a better pathway, potentially.
Absolutely.
Potentially,
Yeah.
right? To say, maybe there is another way of looking at this.
Not potentially. What you created was a different perspective, a different way to look at it.
Yeah.
And reality is when, especially those of us in leadership roles, we tend to get too close to a thing. And so we get blinders on sometimes. And so we can't, just from my own book, right? You can't see the forest through the trees, right?
Right.
Like, and that's
right.
And that's what happens. And it's just a normal occurrence. And we don't know what we don't know. And so when
I've got tons of experience, I've got tons of energy, I've got tons of this, and I can't see this over here.
Yeah.
That someone else can. If I allow them to bring that forward without fear of reprisal, right? With that psychological safety concept.
Well, and you talk a lot about this in your own book, Scott, in the book that you just released, and that's vulnerability. And I think you can't talk about psychological safety without talking about vulnerability. And I think they go hand in hand. There's no question to me. And when you get vulnerable and you allow others to get vulnerable, you create a very psychologically safe environment for people to really collaborate at a high level, and good things tend to happen.
If I create a psychologically safe environment, it provides the opportunity for people to be more vulnerable, right? Part of that, creating that space, is for me to be vulnerable first.
Yeah.
It starts at the top. It's the way the world works. It starts at the top. And if I can't be that, how can I expect other people to be that?
Yeah.
So you're right. The vulnerability is a big part of that. The empathy is another part of that. And then the last piece, and these are actually the last 3 chapters of my book, humility, right? And admittedly, that's the one that I struggle with the most.
Yeah.
Is practicing sincere humility. Not practicing it, being it.
Yeah.
But if you put those 3 things together, vulnerability, humility, and empathy, that is a great start of being the leader that you want to be.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So why don't you talk a little bit about, you're big on psychological safety, and as you've been working with our team, why don't you talk about some of the ways that people can create that environment, and what is it going to take to create a culture of psychological safety? How long should people expect that it's going to take, and where does it start? Where does it end? and all the things, all the things in between.
I got some thoughts on that. So I think the answer to the question, how long does it take? It takes as long as it takes. And here's why I said that. Not everybody has the same propensity to trust, right? There's been things that have happened in this person's background that they're not a very trusting individual,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So just because I'm practicing it, practicing this vulnerability, empathy, humility, doesn't mean it's going to resonate with everybody in the room.
Yeah.
I need to be able to prove, I don't know if that's the right word, but win them over with these concepts because it is more difficult for that person to trust than it is to me. We don't know everybody's background, who was in foster care, who got abused as a child, who had a horrible boss right before that looked like me or it sounded like me or did all those kinds. We don't know all of those things, right? So you can't just demand that everyone just says, hey, I'm vulnerable, you be vulnerable. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
If it did, great, it would be fast. Then we'd be psychologically safe really fast. But it doesn't work like that. So we have to we need to prepare the room. We need to present the conditions for psychological safety.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, define those. Okay, so one of the conditions is that my reactions, right? That my reactions are open. There's two things, curious and willing. Those are the things that I think I need to be. If I'm curious, what do you have to say? And if I'm willing to listen, willing to implement, willing to do something that's not just my idea, that's a good start to create that with my small group that hopefully becomes a team and then a high functioning team, right? It's kind of a process that works. So it takes as long as it takes. And it takes that long based on the person with the least propensity to trust in the room. Now that might shift. If I put all of my attention, if you have low propensity to trust and I put all my attention in building that with you, and I haven't worked with Sally over there that much, she now becomes the person with the lowest propensity because, oh gosh, I get it. This guy's sincere, he's this, is all those kind of things. And but now I might need to shift my attention. Yes, while the attention's on the group as a whole, some individuals need more attention and work than others do.
Yeah.
So go back to the emotional intelligence course that we did together.
Mm-hmm.
Awareness of others, right? Self-awareness first. Who am I and how am I presenting? How do people see me? 'Cause I'll tell you one of the things that happens to me, right? When I hear criticism, and I want to hear criticism and hate hearing it at the same time.
Yeah.
The first thing
we all do this. It's a human trait.
First thing that happens to me is there's a physiological change in my body and my face gets red.
It's normal.
That stops psychological safety. Just that. So now, how do I learn how to manage that?
Mm-hmm.
I've got a friend who actually sits in a chair in this Zen position with his fingers like this, with his arms open, because he had to teach himself how to do this.
Yeah.
So I started practicing that a little bit to say, does this allow me to be more present and hear the critique, the differences of opinion, the criticism, however you want to phrase that, from other people? Whether they're accurate or not, from their point of view, they are. This is how I'm presenting to them, how they're interpreting my presentation. I need to be aware of that. There's a line in the Al-Anon meetings, and we've done a lot of work in Al-Anon and Ar-Anon, that says, what other people think of me is none of my business. Okay, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Like, so that I don't have to get bogged down. But we're in business, and what other people do think of me is my business.
Yeah.
Whether they're customers, whether they're employees, whether they're partners, peers, bosses, whoever, their perception does matter. So what other people think of me is my business. So now I need to not only know how I present, but try to understand how they're interpreting that presentation.
Sure.
So how long does it take? As long as it takes.
Well, there's so many things that come to mind as I'm hearing you talk through all of that. And here's what I'm going to say immediately is so many of our previous episodes come to mind, Scott. And I think if you're going to start somewhere, go listen to our episode on emotional intelligence. Go listen to our podcast episode on body language. And all these things go listen to. We have 3 parts to our communication podcast.
Yeah.
So there's a part 1, part 2, and part 3, and the first 2 parts are our very first 2 episodes.
That's right.
And I'd say go all the way back and listen to that, because it's all a part of what we're talking about in psychological safety. And the last thing that I would mention, because this is the other thing that came to mind. I just think it's bullshit that we ask people to compartmentalize what's going on in their lives.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
And there's this just misnomer that when you hear people say check your baggage at the door, you can't. There's no ticket or gate agent.
I was that guy that had those rules.
No,
put your ego at the door.
Yeah, it's complete bullshit.
Yeah.
And I think when you're asking somebody to do that, it really sucks. It puts them in a bad position. And those of you that think that there's some ticket agent or gate agent that's sitting at the door of your business, that when you walk in, you can just check that baggage.
You can check your cell phone, but you can't check your baggage.
We're not Southwest Airlines.
That's
It's not free. It's not, any of that type of shit. It's the reality is, as much as you think you're checking that baggage at the door, it's following you in. It made its way in before the door ever shut.
Right.
And you go into the meeting and your kid had an episode that morning, or you're having issues with a teacher at school with one of your kids, or the morning just didn't go great. There was traffic, you got in an accident, or you got what, I don't care. Like, stack it up. You're dealing with your mom and your parents and whatever it might be, you can stack it up. There's all kinds of issues, and we're all human beings. We all deal with that. And an example of a psychologically safe environment is to be able to come into a meeting and simply say, guys, I had a really terrible morning. This is going to be a hard meeting for me to be really present in. And I would just like to make the request to step out of this meeting, and maybe I can come back, or maybe I can follow up, or something like that. I mean, just even things like that is just recognizing that we're all human beings, that we have other things going on. Here's the worst thing that could happen. You drag that baggage in, you step into a meeting, somebody says something that you don't like, and you completely lay into them because you didn't like it. But the reality is you're laying into them because the baggage is what's driving
The
that.
second worst thing that you can do is have that baggage there, and you're in the meeting and completely checked out. You're not there. You're not participating in the meeting.
Great example.
So what can leaders do about this, right? So again, this is the recognition. This is the emotional intelligence, the recognition of that, and dealing with that person. If that's what you need right now, whether it's to step out, that's one. I'm not happy with that one. I'm going to try to do something to allow this to present, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm greeting people as they're coming in the door, and I see something in your face. Pull you aside before that and just have a little conversation and take the pressure off, take the burden off, so that you can come into the meeting and present.
Well, another example, let me give you the quick example, because this is what we do in EO, and you know this, when we start a forum meeting, what's the first thing that we do? Is there a clearing?
Clearing.
Allow people,
Moment of silence.
Moment of silence.
Yep.
It's like it's a good best practice. And we do that in our monthlies and our weeklies often. And we just say, hey guys, is there a clearing? Does anybody just need to, this meeting's really important. Does anybody need to get anything off their chest prior to us starting? And it's funny because we'll spend 10 or 15 minutes. If that's what it takes, 10 or 15 minutes for people to
because the next 20 minutes are going to be productive.
Critical,
then, right?
super critical. And you know what? We often, and myself included, I'll just say, hey, thanks for that clearing. I appreciate everybody listening. I got that off my chest. Now I'm present.
And what I've seen in clearings is that by you giving me the opportunity to have a clearing, even if I had something, I got a moment there to let it go and not even need the clearing, not even need to confront whoever it is that wronged me, to say, you know what, maybe it was just a bad day. So let's move forward. So there's some leadership techniques that you can use in order to create this environment for people. But you have to be aware. You have to look for it. If you want to be a good, so while you were talking about check your baggage at the door, I was thinking, I named my book that. I thought I was a leader.
Yeah.
There's a line in the book that says, I thought I was a leader Turns out I was just an asshole. Right? Because I knew the answers. Just do this and 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 everything will be okay. Well, no, these are human beings we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be okay because I told them that it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right? So presenting the opportunity for people to express themselves without that fear of reprisal, psychological safety, to get the meeting started so that they can be present and a participant in the meeting and bring your ideas and share with my ideas to make our ideas better, right? So yeah, it's a whole process of things. How long does it take? It takes as long as it takes.
Well, you know, in the book itself, I'll just give this one example. You know, and she talks about the hospital environment, right? And in particular, a nurse speaking up to a doctor.
Yeah.
And
power differences everywhere.
That's a matter of life and death.
Yeah.
I mean, so imagine how important psychological safety actually can be in an environment. In that environment, it's a matter of life and death. Maybe it's not in your organization when decisions are being made.
Pilots running the same thing. I think Edmondson talks about some pilot interactions, a pilot and a co-pilot, and the power differences there.
100%. Like that's,
matter of life and death.
That's a matter of life and death.
What if it's just a matter of this deal versus that deal? It still matters.
It still matters.
It still matters.
That's the point. Is like I think you know, don't judge the level of importance to somebody or to an organization. I think it's all very, very, very important, and that's the idea behind eliminating the fear.
Yeah.
Right, because that's what we're talking about here. It's just eliminating that fear. So we're getting up on that time, Scott.
Yeah,
and
I was just going to.
So why don't you tell people? I mean, let's wrap this up and really kind of give 2 or 3 takeaways, and then repeat the book, the author, and how they can learn more.
So my first takeaway is do a book study with your group.
Yeah.
Right, read a book together, chapter at a time is how I recommend it. And a chapter a week is fine. I mean, that's what we're doing right now. Do a chapter, think about that and all that. This book study concept makes sense. This is not an Oprah moment. This is an opportunity for me to get a little bit closer and learn a little bit with my team. So I like the book study. The book we happen to be working on right now is called The Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson. And it is all about creating psychological safety. The Fearless Organization. What if your organization was fearless?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, we are, right? Are you? Check yourself. Find out. Let's find out, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I say is that find a good book to work with your team. And I'm not saying all authors have all, like my book's got 10 chapters. If one of those resonates with you, it's worth the 5.5 hours to read it.
I agree.
Right? So find something that you can share with your team and learn and grow together. So that's my point, is the book study piece.
Yeah, my big one is culture. And I'm big on culture, and we've talked about it. We've dedicated a podcast episode to that.
At least one.
And changing culture, right? And I think this concept changes culture, right? And I think you can
Concept of psychological safety? Is that what you're talking about?
Psychological safety. So
Okay.
so the Fearless Organization.
Okay.
So this book really, I think, is as much about shifting the culture of a business as anything else. And I think the countless examples of where not having psychological safety can absolutely destroy an organization is it's pretty compelling. So one example she gives, she talks about a bank, by the way. And she talks about a bank, and she talks about the sales tactics that are taken on because
Wells Fargo.
Yeah, what overtook culture and psychological safety was results.
Well, so that this is a whole nother podcast, but that is, and in fact, we're probably going to get to that inspiration, motivation.
Yeah.
So the rewards that your company presents for whatever results are going to trump the culture that you're trying to set.
Right.
So make sure your reward system is in alignment with your company culture.
Why? So the second thing I was going to talk about, and you said it, thanks for stealing my thunder.
Sorry about that.
Was alignment.
Yeah.
And so you can't say that you have a psychologically safe environment and culture and then have your results or your operational strategy be different or not in alignment with that.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. And so I just wanted to make the point from the book. And if you're thinking about adapting this model, you need to make sure that the whole company is in alignment. And that includes your values and your mission and your purpose.
Absolutely.
And so, if you've got values that are contrary to creating a safe environment, then you got to really, really check that. So I think those are the things to pay attention to. I highly recommend this book. It's a great resource for you to consider a change in culture.
Wonderful. Hey, let's go back just a bit, because I had another thought, and to say, I'm going to give away the secret sauce here, how to make this Oprah book club thing work, right?
Yeah.
Reading the book is not the important part.
Well, why can't it be a Scott DeLong book club? Why does it have to be an Oprah book club?
Oprah's a little more popular.
Okay.
All right. Better looking
Just
too.
saying, man.
But,
Just saying.
okay. So reading the book's good. That's good. We do something called a concept matrix. And the concept matrix is 3 points, right? And it is, and I stole this from another doctoral student that I learned of when I was going to school, is that what was the most important piece of that chapter? What resonated with you?
Yeah.
Second question, and in a small little box, just print this out. What do you think the author meant by that? Third and most important piece of this, what can you do today to implement this in your life? Right. So you got the reading, that's important, the writing, that's important, but the most important part of this is sharing your thoughts with me and the rest of the group. So getting this group back together and talking about what they thought the most important piece was, what it meant to them, and how they might apply it. That doesn't mean that's how you can apply it or how you should apply it, but we can create some synergy in that conversation. In fact, most of the class that when we do these courses, right, most of the time is spent on the experience share portion of that.
Yeah.
Your experience with this topic, bring it to us. We want to hear what you have to say.
Well, I like that third part, Scott.
powerful.
I was just talking about this last night with somebody, and how often do you read a book or you go to a seminar and you listen to what everybody has to say, and you're so fired up afterward.
I learned so much.
Loved it, and you do zero about it.
Right.
And so that third box that you're talking about is, what can I do with this concept today and implement it? How can I apply it to my business? How can I apply it to my life? That's important, because if you just write it down, you're more apt to actually do something about it.
So here's what I really like about this process too. And again, this is where we're beyond time, and this is not what this podcast was about. But what I really like about this process is that we're working one chapter at a time. Typically, when I read a book, I read The Atomic Habits, right? I got one idea out of Atomic Habits because I just read through it. Got one idea. Oh, your habits create your life, right? And follow through on your habits, and you'll create the life that you want to create.
Yeah.
There's 10 chapters in a book. I can get 10 different ideas from this book by doing it one by one by one. The concept matrix helps with that, and the sharing with your peers is a big piece of that.
Well, if you've listened this far, then you just got some killer nuggets.
You just saved yourself $7,000.
A little bit of secret sauce from Scott right there. So we appreciate you listening all the way through on this one. Until next time. And by the way, that Pliny was very good.
Yeah, it was. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for joining us for the CEO Podcast. Please visit us at theceopodcast.net, where you can learn more about our co-hosts and listen to past episodes. If you would like to have a discussion and dive deeper into any topic, there is also an option to contact Scott or Vince to schedule some time with them. Thanks for listening.